Hello, I'm Kimberly Parnell, and you are listening to Engaging Texas Families, a podcast from the Parent and Family Engagement Statewide Initiative of Texas. Let's jump into today's episode. Welcome back to Engaging Texas Families. Today we're joined by Marcela Andres. Marcela is the President and CEO of Designed Engagement. Marcela, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Super excited.
Well, I know you have an unwavering belief in the transformative power of just connection and engaging families and educators and communities just as partners to support students. Kind of start off by telling our listeners about yourself.
Oh, wow. There's so much to share. And you know, what's funny, as you know, I'm not the very surface level kind of person. It's like, oh, I just like the weather and stuff like that. No, I go deep. And so,
I love it.
I'll lead with, I am the proud daughter of immigrants. My mother is from Atotonilco, Nieves, Zacatecas, Mexico. Whew, that's a mouthful always. And my father is from Havana, Cuba. And they both came to this country with the American dream. And I think they learned really quickly that the American dream takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of sacrifice. And it is through that work and sacrifice that I witnessed their devotion to us, to my sisters and I, and without getting too much into the details, my father and my mother separated when we were very young, and it was even that much more difficult for my mom to navigate educational systems. But what I think drives my why is not what drives my why, is definitely what drives my why. Listen, it is that despite the fact that my mom was an immigrant, despite that she became single, that she didn't know the language, she didn't know the culture, she had her family and she had educators and she had her community to come alongside her and really support my sisters and I to become all that we wanted to be. And I feel like as a benefactor of humanity and that partnership, it really shapes how I lead my work, but how I just think about life. And so I love cooking. I love dancing. I love doing the work that I do. So that's deep and that's me.
I would second the fact that Marcela is a go deep conversation person. I've had dinner with Marcela a couple of different times, and it's instantly, you don't get to talk about the weather or how was your flight or what are you doing? It's like, tell me about yourself. What's going on? And I love that. I think the power of connection has the potential to change a lot of things. So I love that. Marcela, you recently did a TED Talk. Tell us about that.
Whew, it's exhilarating. Let me tell you, if you have it in your heart to do a TED Talk, then do it. First apply, then write it, and then get on that stage and do it. But I would say, from the experience, there's so much to share about it. Definitely, if you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to share my experience. But I think what I want to lift up in this conversation is, when I stood on that stage, I really wanted to share ideas that changed the world. And it goes back to my why. And that is that none of us get to pick the circumstances that we were born into. And yet we all have an opportunity to make this world a better place. And in that TED Talk, I talked a little bit about my story. I talked a little bit about why I truly believe in the power of humanity. And then I gave 5 principles that are in my book as well to really support educators to deepen relationships with their students and ultimately impact their outcomes like my educators impacted my life.
I love it. Well, you touched on it, but you talk about a teacher who saw beyond your circumstances in that TED Talk, and it's amazing. We can link it, I think, in our show notes if somebody would like to go back and look at it, or it's on your website also. What did that look like for you in real life?
Ooh, it was, and it still is. As you know, she's still very much part of my life, very incredible. I mean, to have somebody, especially in your most formative years, when you're navigating cultural assimilation, when you're navigating your own young identity as a person, when you're navigating your consciousness and understanding like, oh my gosh, we live in poverty, and you see the things that you see when you live in poverty. To have an educator constantly look at you in the face and tell you that you're amazing, that you're going to do great things in the world, to ask you about your family, to always give you a word of encouragement, is what I lived and what I think that every child should live every single day when they step inside of a classroom. And so her name is Mrs. Tavasoli. I love her, love her, love her to death. And still to this day, she's always asking me how I'm doing. And she's
Love
always
it.
telling me I'm doing great things and I'm going to do great things. And I'm like, wow, you are an educator for life.
I love that. You challenge educators, I think, to break the box of labels and limitations. What are some of the most common boxes you think our students get put into?
Yeah, I think those labels specifically, like at risk, have so much power to change or impact the way an educator might perceive a child or a family. It's so broad and it doesn't really tell the story. It doesn't give the background to why they are quote unquote at risk. You know, even in the neighborhood that I grew up in, at risk for me meant that I came from a single family household. We spoke very limited English in the household. And yet, like down the street, I had neighbors that both of their parents were gone. They were being raised by a grandmother, or, you know, there was death in the family. Like there was different layers of being at risk. And I think that using terminology that has a negative connotation seeps into our psyche and it can really affect what educators could believe about students. I think another box or another thing that impacts the way we see children is just the lack of time. And this is not an educator thing. I think this is, you know, a system thing that we just are like, go, 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 go. Let's do this, teach to the test. And I know great educators don't do that, despite the fact that they're mandated to do that. But the time that it takes to build relationships, I think, is important, and I don't think that we're afforded that in the schoolhouse. And I think I went down a little rabbit hole there, but I think it's important too.
Well, you went down a rabbit hole, but that was actually my next question. How do you think educators can balance those academic expectations that you spoke of while truly honoring where students come from?
Yeah, I mean, I think standards and, you know, structure, if you will, at the broadest sense is necessary. And yet, I do firmly believe that when an educator is preparing for their day, they need to think about how can they come across their most authentic self to deliver the content in the most authentic way that will relate to the children in their classroom. And so that's where we go back to that at risk. You know, if you know their stories, if you know their backgrounds, if you know their current context, if you know who they are, like what they like, then you can deliver a math problem or math lessons centered in joy and learning and make it really relevant. And so I think, you know, being cognizant that there are these structures and standards that are necessary to like check off, if you will, but also having the agency to say, I am an educator and my call is to share the knowledge that I have with the children in my room and figuring out the best way that the children in your room are going to be able to receive that knowledge and exchange it with you because education by its purest form is learning and it's a two-way street.
I love that. Also love that you wholeheartedly believe in family collaboration. You spoke a little bit about it earlier. It's a core part of your approach when you talk about parent and family engagement everywhere you go. What does meaningful family engagement look like, especially in communities that are impacted by generational poverty or systemic barriers, or maybe a circumstance like your own?
Yeah, I mean, I think meaningful family engagement goes down to what Dr. Karen Mapp at Harvard Graduate School of Education, mind you, has clearly researched with colleagues in the field. It's like trust. And that's basically what relationships are, right? Like if we don't trust one another, do we have a relationship? And, you know, I know we've had dinner before and I go deep, but I also think it's really imperative that we operate with a level of trust and assuming the best right up front, especially in an educational setting. I think that that's what core family engagement comes down to is trust, and then building on that trust, building on that relationship, and most definitely not keeping it surface level and getting to know one another. I have said in occasion, the schoolhouse is about coming in as strangers and leaving as community members. And that is exactly what happens when you start with trust and then you build on the conversations and get to know one another as human beings.
I love that. Coming in as strangers, but leaving as partners. That's amazing. Well, you talked about this earlier too. You are also an author. I don't know what you do in your spare time, but it's clearly not sit and watch TV. But
I do watch TV.
In that book, you had 5 transformational principles that you talked about. Which one of those feels like the best place to start for an educator, and why? If you could just choose one of them.
Ooh, I think it just depends on where the educator is at, to be quite honest with you. If an educator is listening, I would say I would start with the setting before the principles, because I talk about positionality, like what the research says, what human development research says of who you are in the life of children. I think that our country, our educational system, our way of being in the US really dishonors who educators are. And in that chapter, I specifically uplift like you are, and we all know this, like the engine that creates other fields and careers and presidents and leaders and engineers, and their power that you hold is incredible. And so I think that's the one that I would start with, because when you know your influence over the life of children, over the life of communities, over the life of legacy, you operate differently. The other ones are really good principles, but I definitely think that you have to start with you and how you're positioned and why you do the work that you do.
I love that. I love it. You talked about Harvard a little bit ago. Tell us about your work with Dr. Mapp.
It's incredible. I love her to death. I know I've shared this with you before, but I didn't come from education originally. My background is in business. I did insurance, everything. And then when I became a classroom teacher in Mexico, which is another story for another time, but I had the opportunity to work really closely with families. And when I moved back to the US, I helped open schools, and that's really where I fell in love with families and really fell in love with like working alongside them, only to learn that there's an actual field of family and community engagement. And that's where I learned first of Dr. Mapp's work back in 2012. And I dreamt, and I've told her this many times, of like going to Harvard, being her student, asking her to be my mentor, and never did I imagine that she would actually become a close friend. And so she is all of that for me. She is the thought leader of our time for family and community engagement. Her work is brilliant. It is grounded on decades upon decades of research, and she's an incredible human being that lives and breathes this work, because it is the right work. It's the work of humanity, and I feel like what she's created at the Ed School, in creating an institute, right? Because it's not a conference. You don't come in and you don't pick and choose what kind of class or sessions you go to. You go to all of them because it is an institute. And I've seen year after year how leaders come in with some not knowing a lot about family engagement, and some knowing pretty well versed, but everyone leaving just absolutely stronger, more well prepared with the plan, but I think more importantly with a tangible hope of the possibility of change, like what we're all trying to elevate.
Great. Marcela has been a coach at Harvard in the FAM Institute. I think that's how I originally met you. And it, like she said, it is incredible work. I think you come in with a preconceived notion of what you think it is. And at least for me, in the first hour, I was very unsettled, like, oh, maybe that's not what I really thought it was. And let me work through my feelings and my emotion and make my heart and my head make them feel a little bit uncomfortable, so I rethink this in a different way. It was definitely a great experience for me. You recently wrote an article about professional wrestling and how it relates to parent and family engagement. Do you mind sharing that story with our listeners? Because I think it had a very profound connection. You're laughing, but seriously, it was great.
Yes. Okay. So it's funny because I'm not like a big wrestling fan or person. However, my husband, I'm recently married, and my husband is. And years ago when we were dating, I gave him tickets to go to a wrestling show. And I'm laughing because when I say I like think and breathe family and community engagement, like this is a perfect example. And so I accompanied him to the wrestling show. And at first I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? I'm over here, but I'm like, all right, this is a good partner. Let's do this. And so I was sitting there and I was just engrossed by the energy, the culture, and the movement. And, I was definitely watching like the wrestling, if you will, but as someone who loves systems and someone who does family community engagement work, there were clear moments that for me were evident of how the WWE has done a phenomenal job of engagement. They have built a really strong brand. They've built a really strong sense of partnership, even with folks that are not present. Like the sentiment is also shared from the TV box when you're at home. The participants know the anthems, they know the opening songs, like all this stuff. And so I just felt compelled to write about it because I think I write about family engagement in very research heavy ways, and I was like, what a different way to like write about family engagement. And so I told my husband, I was like, I'm gonna write about WWE through family engagement, and he started laughing. I'm like, no, I'm being serious. Like that's what I'm gonna do. And so then I did it, and it was just such a great experience. And now, preview to the next thing. He is a kid at heart. He also loves Pokemon. And as my friends at Harvard now know, I'm also collecting Pokemon because I'm also going to write a Pokemon article because, again, it goes back to building culture and systems. So anyways, I derailed from WWE, but for sure, they got some systems in place. And most importantly, what I want to lift up there is, schools can really take note of some of the things that the WWE has done to build that culture, that practice, that sense of community that they have built with their viewers.
Yeah, I loved your part in there where you talked about generational, that there was
My goodness.
a little boy and a dad and what
Yeah.
appeared to be a great, like you said, it's generational. And I loved that. It was great. It was a great connection piece for me. Well, as we close today, what is one call to action you have for our listeners?
I mean, look, I think it just comes down to being a really great human being. I said this earlier, like we do not get to pick the circumstances that we're born into. I mean, the last check, you cannot call anywhere and be like, oh, excuse me, I want this different life package.
If you
And I,
find that, will you let us know?
yeah, but
Okay.
I've been looking for it and it just doesn't exist. So what I will say is I believe in purpose. I believe that each and every one of us were born with a purpose. I also believe that we were born at this exact time that we were born, and that we are all called to do our best every single day. And doing our best for me just means, showing up for yourself, showing up for your family, showing up for your community, and just figuring out how each day can be a little bit better. And so I think that's what I would leave folks with. And definitely, if you translated that to school, enter the schoolhouse as a stranger, and find ways to leave as true community members.
I love it. Enter as a stranger and leave as community people together in collaboration. Well, Marcela, thanks so much for joining us today. We love you. We love your work. Keep it up. We love what you do for kids in our state and all across our nation. And you definitely live out what you just said. Make the world a better place every single day. And so thank you for your work there. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.